Okay, cool. So hi everybody, thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Zoe Adams. Zoe completed her PhD in linguistics at Queen Mary, University of London. Her research focuses on the relationship between language and decision-making. She has experience with interdisciplinary projects with a center on public health, macroeconomics, misinformation, language of persuasion, and regulatory trust. And I believe that today she works as the head of insight and innovation at Kamwell Limited. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. Yes.
So thank you so much, Zoe, for joining us today.
Fab. So shall I begin?
Yes. Please.
Wonderful. Super. So thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me to speak today. Your lab does some really fascinating work. And looking at the work of your lab, your honesty project stood out. I mean, they all stood out, but that one stood out in particular in relation to the rebuilding macroeconomics project that I worked on, where I analysed the language used by people who were both dishonest and honest and perceptions of this language. So that's what I'll be talking about today. Let's see if my slides seem to be. Now, I'm just wondering how to, are the slides going through now? Just want to check.
Yeah, all good.
Yes.
Good, thank you. So a social dilemma is a situation which creates conflict between the individual's interests and those of the wider group. So it's about cooperation. A good example of this is recycling, which aims to reduce our carbon footprint. If you never recycle, then it serves your immediate goals because it's more convenient. And in this sense, the rational strategy is to defect, so to not recycle and convince everyone else to recycle. That way you get to live on a clean planet without any of the inconvenience. But if everyone did that, then the planet would suffer. So cooperating is better for everyone. Another example would be the stockpiling during COVID, or you can watch the popular dating show Too Hot to Handle on Netflix for another more interesting example. So these dilemmas are an inherent feature of our society, and communication is a fundamental element of cooperation. From the perspective of misinformation, another theme of your lab, people can use misinformation to encourage or discourage cooperation. For example, a politician might proclaim that global warming is a myth, thereby discouraging recycling. Now, the role of communication in social dilemmas is very well documented. For example, David Sally did a meta-analysis of 35 studies, which found that communication increases cooperation by 40%. And there are a few main theories as to why this happens. So the first is that communication induces a norm of cooperation, whereby people believe that pro-social actions are expected of them. The second is that communication fosters a bond, which enhances the kind of the in-group identity, and this makes people feel more inclined to cooperate. And the third is that communication offers the chance for promise making, and so individuals uphold their commitments to avoid cognitive dissonance. And while there have been a few content analyses of the communication in social dilemmas, there's been less emphasis on what exactly is being said. So building on Irving Goffman's work, Sally urged us to notice that social dilemmas are inherently interactional. And there's a lovely quote here where it says, "Talk is not cheap, rather it's complicated, creative, implied, affective and effective, altering speaker and listener and any embedded game. Once you let in a drip or two of literal meaning, you cannot prevent all of language from flooding in. Poetry, promising, metaphor, irony, insult, intimacy, and the rest." So previous research was rooted in quite a quantitative approach to communication, but we aim to show how a mixed qualitative and quantitative examination can help us understand what's occurring incrementally and in real time regarding cooperation. So, in analysing what is being said, we can turn to one of the most crucial features of human language, which is stance. And it's seen as the smallest unit of social action. Stance taking basically refers to speakers' evaluations of the world around them. And we develop stances in response to other speakers. So the interaction develops dynamically and intersubjectively. It's a lot about relationships. So to the right, we have Dubois' representation of stance taking, the stance triangle. And I'm going to explain the concept of alignment, which at the outset I'll say is quite similar to agreement. So here I have an example. Let's imagine a group of people have just discovered that one person broke the lockdown rules. They left their house and they defected by going against collective action, which is to stay at home to reduce infections. And speaker one says to the group, "Oh, I'd never be that selfish." Here, the speaker is negatively evaluating the defective behaviour of the individual, which is known as the stance focus. So it's essentially answering the question, what are they talking about? Speaker two, in saying this, the speaker one positions herself in relation to others. Speaker two then says, "Oh, me neither." So this speaker is also negatively evaluating the defective behaviour of this individual. So essentially, he's agreeing with her. And in doing so, he positions himself in such a way that it creates an alignment between the two speakers. And as individuals evaluate different stance foci throughout a discussion, they align with and disalign from one another to different degrees. Now, as I said, alignment is at its core often conceptualized as agreement, which is known as evaluative alignment, but it can also be participating faithfully in the discussion, such as answering a question rather than just ignoring it, or saying something relevant rather than irrelevant. For instance, if you asked me, "Zoe, will you join us and vote against this bill?" And I responded, "I've got to go," or "the weather's nice," then I'm disaligning from you in kind of a structural sense. So a stance can therefore signal alignment or disalignment and ultimately facilitate or constrain cooperation. And stance is about the language between people. That's something to note in comparison to register. So as soon as someone decides to adopt a given stance during an interaction, we have so many different ways of how we're going to signal it. Stances aren't tied to certain ways of speaking, whether I align with or disalign from you. I can do this in lots of different ways. So the voices that a speaker takes on in different social situations is known as register. So it's a type of language associated with specific social groups, and communication in society is organised around registers. So some examples might be parental or slang or childlike, for example. And just an example to show the difference, for example, I could say, "I'm glad," or I could say, "Yippee." And you would likely all agree that the expression yippee is far more playful, it implicates this childlike role, and it has reduced social distance. Now, once an individual introduces other shadow authors, and I say shadow authors because the words that we use are never our own. The reason I use a formal register now in this presentation, as opposed to a childlike register, for example, is because people who've done presentations before me use a formal register. So once I use a particular register, my position is no longer kind of my position alone. It has the force of all those speakers who came before me. So registers add force to a stance. And so register is more about language within a person. So stance is about language between people. Register is about language within a person, just to highlight the difference there. So onto the methodology. I kind of spoke into my bottle there. Onto the methodology. So this is it was an adapted public goods game with 4 stages, and there were 2 rounds. 2 rounds of play and 2 rounds of feedback, and the first round was exactly the same as the second round. So there were 90 participants, 12 males, 78 females, all over the age of 18. And the first thing was that participants were assigned to a group with 4 others. So each group had 5 people in it. Now, in round 1, participants were individually invited to the lab and asked to squeeze a hand grip device 40 times. Now, as this involves effort, each squeeze was associated with 40p reward. And they were told that there was an option for them to keep the proceeds from each kind of grip squeeze, but that they could also choose to contribute some or all of the squeezes to a group pot. Now, before they performed this effort task, they were asked to state how many squeezes out of 40 did they intend to donate to the group pot, and to the individual pot. So this was known as the choice stage. They then performed the squeezing task, and this was known as the action stage. And they either started squeezing for the individual pot or the public pot, so it was kind of counterbalanced. And after each squeeze, they were told that they could continue contributing to their starting pot, or they could switch to the other pot. And once participants made that switch, they couldn't switch back. And then the task was finished when all 40 squeezes were completed. And they didn't have to stick with their intended split between the group pot and the individual pot if they didn't want to. Now, the reason for this setup is to see whether people's cooperative behaviour changed once they realised how much effort was involved. You may say you intend to contribute all 40 squeezes to the group pot, but then you start doing the task and you think, no, I'm not doing that. I want 10 for myself. And you only give 30 to the group. Now, as per public goods games, the group pot contributions were multiplied by 1.5 and then divided evenly among all members of the group. So each participant's final reward was whatever was in their individual pot and an equal share of what was in the group pot. After this, participants joined an online discussion, which was available for 36 hours, and each group received one of 3 different types of feedback about the effort task. And this was to see how different feedback may impact behaviour. And in the first condition, this was called intention, I revealed the number of squeezes each person intended to give to the group pot, as well as the actual amount of money in the group pot. So, for example, I said player 1 intended to give 12 squeezes to the group, player 2 intended to give 26 squeezes to the group, and so on. And then the amount in the group pot is £56. In the second condition, which is called action, I revealed the number of squeezes each person actually gave to the group pot, plus the amount in the group pot. And then in the third condition, I just revealed the amount in the group pot. So there was no information about each player's individual intended or actual contributions. There were 6 players for each condition, but I'll be focusing less on the relationship between the feedback and cooperation and more on what was said and what this can tell us about people's kind of subsequent contributions in round 2, which involved the same effort task and an online discussion. Now, as a reminder, the rational strategy is to convince everyone to cooperate and give all their money from their squeezes to the group pot, while you defect and keep all your squeezes for yourself. The best thing for the group is for everyone to contribute all the money to the group pot. Now, in a conversation where group decision making may be involved, it's very difficult to identify when or whether a group has reached a decision, because the process has these kind of incremental steps. So how can we address this? Well, we can track how group consensus is formed by looking at how alignment between the group members progresses during an interaction in this kind of real-time format. And Kiesling et al., they measured stance taking from a computational perspective, and they coded Reddit posts on a scale of 1 to 5 across 3 dimensions of stance. I won't go into too much detail here, but the other dimensions of stance are affect, which is whether the utterance is positive or negative in valence with regards to the stance focus, and investment, so how the strength of the evaluation. We focused on alignment because it allows us to see how a speaker's original stance is either endorsed or transformed or undermined by following speakers, and a treatment of alignment as continuous rather than align, disalign. It allows more subtle kind of nuances to emerge. So we're looking at what emerges between group members as the discussion progresses. So we closely followed Kiesling et al.'s process, whereby each utterance was annotated for a value of 1 to 5 for alignment. A score of 5 indicates high alignment and 1 indicates low alignment. First, we identified a stance focus for each utterance in the group chat. Now, in a social dilemma context, this could be the reward, which is something external to the discourse, or a previous speaker's suggested strategy, which is in the discourse itself. And that's what we can see in the table here. For example, the first comment that you can see by Gold4M says, we can do around 25 or 30 in the pot. And the focus here is a strategy for round 2. But then Gold2M replies, well, why not maximize it and put all 40 in the pot? Bigger the contribution, bigger the reward, don't you think? So the stance focus here is Gold 4M's suggestion, and he's disaligning from Gold 4M here. So the alignment score for Gold 2M's utterance is 1. Conversely, in the next example, Green 4F says, I'm happy to add all the credits to the group if everyone is in agreement. So again, the stance focus is a strategy for round 2, to which Green 1M says, yay, and the stance focus is Green 4F's promise to cooperate. So there's high alignment here, so we can give this comment a score of 5 for his utterance. So alignment is like a backwards looking dimension. Each utterance is evaluated in the context of the previous. We did sometimes need to segment the comments if they had a different stance focus, so that each annotation of alignment had just one stance focus. On the other hand, if there was a single stance focus over the entire comment, we didn't need to segment it. And myself and the second author blind double-coded the first discussion and compared the results, and then disagreements were examined to develop more kind of explicit heuristics for ambiguous cases. Now, as we're interested in the chat room data, I'll very briefly mention here that as well as looking at alignment in real time, we also calculated an average consensus score for each of the 18 groups. And this is different from alignment, which I'll explain why. So to do this, we scored each utterance in terms of how much it supported a group consensus to cooperate, ranging from -1 to 1 in increments of 0.25. For instance, encouragements, promises received a high score, whereas doubt, hesitation received a lower score nearer to kind of -1. So each statement was examined in isolation. And this is different from alignment, which is based on the dynamic relationship between utterances. And it's possible for an utterance to align with someone, but not receive a high consensus score, such as agreements, which aren't related to the task of cooperating. For instance, someone said, the task was fun, wasn't it? And someone replied, yes, really fun. The second speaker is aligning with the first speaker, but it's not helping the group reach a consensus to cooperate. So the average consensus score for each group was the independent variable in a linear regression analysis, and the dependent variable was the difference in the total number of group squeezes between round 1 and round 2. And a higher difference in group squeezes indicated more cooperation because it showed that people gave more squeezes to the group. And this revealed that the average chat room score predicted the difference in squeezes between round 1 and round 2. So this result supports existing claims that the quality of communication affects cooperative behaviour, but now we can start to look at why. So I know that there's kind of focus in your honesty project on the political side of things. So I'd start with this case study, which is I've labelled the politician, otherwise known as the orange team. So on each of these slides, of which there'll be 3, you can see a full transcript of the chat room on the right, the alignment graph on the bottom left, and then the total number of squeezes contributed to the group by each player. Not that I'm touching on the condition, but this group was in the action condition. That is, the actual squeezes contributed by each member was revealed in the chat, along with the total amount in the group pot. So the total squeezes, they did increase 79 to 132. It's not bad, but only 2 participants contributed the maximum amount. So we've got Orange 1F, who's at the top, and Orange 3F. And of these, it was only Orange 1F who actually changed her behaviour, because Orange 3F gave 40 in the first round as well. 2 of them failed to increase their contributions at all. In fact, it was Orange 4F actually gave one squeeze less to the group. So let's see what happens. The discussion begins with Orange 1F and Orange 2M agreeing to increase their contributions. It says, I think if we give half to the group, it may make the reward higher, but only by a little bit. And then she says, actually, I think it would be better if we gave at least 30 to the group pot, since we would all benefit from it. And then Orange 2M says, 30 seems like a good number. This is where Orange 3F joins the discussion with a very formal greeting. Hello, everyone. As you can see, I have given all my squeezes to the group. I believe we should all do the same in the next stage in order to maximise our income. Is anyone else of the same opinion as me? Logically, none of you have to lose, but only gain. So She's disaligning from these speakers, as you can see in the alignment graph, by drawing attention to her cooperative behaviour in round one and emphasising the others' lack of altruism through her use of you, as you can see. She also uses the present perfect tense, I have given, which is a persuasive technique in political discourse that brings past decisions to the present moment. She then pushes for full cooperation rather than 30 squeezes. And she says, I believe we should all do the same. Notice the verb I believe. This expresses a very strong degree of epistemic certainty, often seen in political speech in the context of prediction rather than possibility. And it contrasts with Orange 1F's earlier use, if we go to the comment 1 again, of I think and other hedging devices which signal low epistemic commitment, it may, and so on. Also, Orange 3F doesn't opt for kind of a low social distance format, such as what do you think? Is anyone else of the same opinion as me? So that positions her as the norm. And she then discourages disagreement by framing her decision, any decision to not cooperate as illogical. So the authoritative and somewhat argumentative nature of her comments stand out. Orange 2M replies and says, thank you for your generosity, Orange 3F. For sure, if we all do it, it will benefit all of us to a great extent. So then we see some resistance coming in comment 7 with Orange 4F. She says, hi, everyone. Sorry for coming late to the party. It's interesting seeing everyone's contributions, particularly Orange 3F. I didn't expect anyone to be that generous. We all gain if we put the total amount in, but given this is anonymous and we don't know what everyone else to do, it's hard to decide. So she's labelling the results as interesting, a slightly critical assessment of Orange 3F's generosity, arguably. Further still, in comment 8, she explicitly introduces concerns over trust, which we observed is associated with less cooperative groups, and this has been found in other studies as well. So what does Orange 3F do? Well, she attempts to regain control in comments 9 and 10. And she says, I believe we could trust in the human decency of each other and leave the experiment with both money and a satisfied feeling of cooperation. I will be doing the same in the previous part and hope you can retaliate my blind trust. So there's a real emotional appeal here to the human decency, hope, and cooperation, still in the political register, but there's a kind of note of frustration with the net speak of you. Additionally, as a non-native speaker of English, it seems to create kind of an asymmetric power dynamic in an unintended direction, which is research has shown in computer-mediated communication environments. And this is most notable in the use of retaliate rather than the more suitable reciprocate. Now, Orange 3F does have an effect on Orange 1F, who says, well, I'm more than happy, in comment 11, I'm more than happy to give all my squeezes to the group, as we'll all win from it. So that's great. And she does indeed contribute all 40 to the group in round 2. However, Orange 4F responds with a phrase popularised by a hip hop album in the 2000s titled Get Rich or Die Trying. This is a very stark contrast to the political register, as hip hop is by its very nature a genre of resistance, similar to punk or grime in the UK, and she's not participating faithfully in the discussion. So it's structural disalignment. Even though her sentiment could be positive, her comment isn't relevant. And then the conversation ends with Orange 5F agreeing to cooperate, and she says, I think this sounds like a good plan if we all contribute at least something to the group pot. So she's reinterpreted Orange 3F strategy. And indeed, she does contribute at least something, 4 squeezes in round 2. So it appears that Orange 4F interpreted Orange 2M and Orange 1F's promises as cheap talk. If you look in the table, Orange 1F gave 15, Orange 2M gave 0 in round 1. And their low contributions in this round are inconsistent with their pledges to cooperate. And studies suggest that past behaviour is a strong indicator of one's trustworthiness. So this issue of trust is then exacerbated by Orange 3F's kind of awkward attempt to impose her stance to a political voice, and there's resistance from Orange 4F. In other words, it seems that Orange 4F and Orange 5F misperceived the other members' honesty, which was reflected in their comments here. That's why we see a lot of low points in the alignment graph. But you may be wondering, well, what happened when the results of round 2 were revealed? Well, upon discovering the cooperative behaviour of her group, Orange 4F remarks, wow, I guess I need to be more trusting. And that's the same for orange 5F. Oh, wow, that is a great result. I guess I also need to be more trusting. So that is an example of a less successful group. We're now going to move on to the business meeting, otherwise known as the gold team. And they were told how many squeezes each member intended to contribute. And it should be noted that intended squeezes were the same as actual squeezes, with the exception of Gold 4M, who intended to contribute 10 rather but actually gave 6. So we've got 83 in the first round, 125 in the second round, and success was mainly hindered by the defection of 2 participants I want you to look at, Gold 1F and Gold 5M. Now, unlike the previous group, the problem isn't distrust or a perception that someone is dishonest, but arguably the opposite, too much trust and a perception that liars are honest, which is why there aren't that many drops in the alignment graph with the exception of comment 11. So the illusion kind of unravels in round 2, which I'll share with you. We'll dive at the beginning into these 2 defectors, and then I'll discuss the business registers. So Gold 2M starts by aligning with Gold 1F's evaluation of the results. And she says, everyone's contributions are not too low, which is a good thing. That's a decent amount of contribution, he says. The more everyone contributes, the more you all get. Now, notice the you here. And Gold 3F says, well done, group. And that's all she says, actually, in this discussion. And then Gold 1F agrees with Gold 2M and says, the more we contribute, it benefits us all. So she's upgraded the collective benefit of altruism from his you to us. So she's drawing attention to her kind of trustworthiness without an explicit promise. And Goffman actually says that this kind of strategic ambiguity, such as omissions and avoidance, like we see here, allows people to profit from lies without really telling any. And indeed, she participates no further in the discussion, which makes sense once we see her contribution of 5 in round 2, 5 squeezes to the group in round 2. And so there's a perceived honesty, and Gold 2M believes her, and he responds in comment 5, defo will ensure group pot increases in part 3. But this perceived honesty is also reflected in his reaction to her behaviour in round 2. So I'm just going to go to the second chat once the round 2 squeezes were revealed, and then I'll come back to this. So he says, Gold 1F is moving mad. Everyone agreed to share 40 to increase the pot. More squeezes shared, more money earned. Someone is obviously content being selfish and earning less than sharing and earning more. So I'll go back to the main chat now, but I just wanted you to see it shows that he's perceiving her to be honest here. Now, continuing the chat, Gold 4M joins in comment 6 and says, yes, we can increase the contribution as it's quite profitable to us all. And then the defector, Gold 5M, he's proven himself in round 1. He joins in comment 7. He's proven himself. He contributed 30 squeezes, more than anyone else. And he emphasizes the precise financial reward of cooperating, which helps him assume this authoritative kind of position within the group. And he says, hi, everyone, that's a good amount. The more we contribute, the more we'll get since it's times 1.5. Shall we go all in for part 3? If we all do, instead of £16, we each get 24. So we've got strong epistemic forms. We've got direct questioning. Shall we go all in for part 3? Now, you might be wondering, how can we be sure that his decision to defect was present from the outset? Well, once the results of round 2 were revealed, Gold 5M responded to the punishments from his disgruntled group. So I'll go back to the chat again so you can see how we might know this. And we see, so Gold 5M is moving loose. That's halfway down the transcript. Que pasa? Gold 3F says, well done to those who kept to the agreement. Clearly, some group members cannot help being out for themselves. Greed can be seen from 2 guys here. Please study maths. It will be helpful in the future. Gold 5M responds, I am studying maths. It benefits me when I convince everyone to contribute as much as possible while I contribute none. This allows me to get the most. Sorry, guys. So we know that his decision to defect is present in this chat at the moment, or at least that's what this indicates. So in terms of, I believe it's and correct me if I'm wrong, the tripartite model of honesty, which I saw in your honesty project, Gold 5M is not communicating what he believes to be true, but everyone else perceives him to be honest. with the exception of maybe Gold 1F, who also defected. Now, Gold 5M also capitalizes on this, he makes an allegiance with Gold 2M, who enthusiastically endorses his strategy in comment 8, says best possible solution. We all go in for the pot and it becomes larger. And then we see another strong epistemic form, exactly. So they've got this they've got this alliance going on. But unfortunately for Gold 2M, pledging cooperation makes cooperators easy prey for defectors. Now, let's examine the interesting blend of registers, as well as there's a negotiation that occurs. So I'd like to direct your attention to comment 6 again, when Gold 4M enters the exchange and he says, yeah, we can increase the contribution as it's quite profitable to us all. This is not only very ambiguous with words such as we can and quite, which shows a lack of commitment, but also a more formal business voice. He uses the term profitable, which didn't appear anywhere else in the 18 discussions. And then the business speak extends to line 8, as we saw earlier, best possible solution, which wasn't seen anywhere else in the discussion. And in line 10, Gold 4M disaligns with both Gold 2M and Gold 5M suggestion. He says, we can do around 25 or 30 in the group pot. But mirroring Gold 4M's kind of formal and frank approach, Gold 2M destabilizes his position in the group as a powerful kind of negotiator and frames Gold 4M's thought process as flawed by failing to opt for the most financially beneficial option in comment 11. Why not maximize it and put all 40 in the pot? Bigger the contribution, bigger the reward, don't you think? Gold 5M is chilling. He is just sat back here. He simply says, yes, I agree. Put all 40 in the group pot and we'll have a bigger reward. This works in his favor. Someone is now doing the convincing for him. And then to Gold 4M's eventual kind of humiliation, Gold 2M presides over the ultimate decision by responding with a definitive, I approve. Another instance of a business register. And this is interesting because it's his formal tone here contrasts not only with his kind of previous use of slang, defo, which we saw in comment 5, but he also uses multicultural London English that we saw in round 2, moving mad, kind of moving loose. And then the following day, Gold 4M finally accepts the terms of agreement. Now, once the results are revealed in round 2, their sense of betrayal is evident. We acknowledge talk is cheap, but only for one player. The other defector, Gold 1F, didn't promise to cooperate at all. And this avoidance suggests that actually, in fact, she views talk as anything but cheap, perhaps. And then the binding promises of the other 2 players and their intense negative reaction shows that for them, talk is an honest signal of cooperative intentions. Now, I would like to also show you a successful group, and then I might kind of skip over what the other groups did in terms of time. But so what did a successful group look like? Well, here we have the family game show, otherwise known as the Green Team. Curiously, they only found how much was in the group pot. They had no idea what each individual intended or actually contributed. 2 group members contributed the maximum both times, and that's Green 1M and Green 5F, while the remainder increased their contributions in the second round. So there was a maximum of 200 there. Now, this cooperation may be a bit surprising when we look at the graph and can see it had quite a rocky start, but let's dive in. So before the results were revealed, Green 1M says, hi peeps, hope you all acted altruistically and weren't greedy. Scores on the doors tomorrow. I love this sentence, it's so packed. So he refers to his group with this kind of, solidarity marker, hi peeps, but then he communicates that everyone's reputation is kind of under threat with words like altruistic and greedy. These are really charged with a moral evaluation. And then we've got the double exclamation marks that kind of add force to this moral sanction. But his tone is mitigated by a very playful scores on the doors, which is a phrase popularized, maybe some of you know, by the television show The Generation Game. And you may have heard of it. It's an intergenerational family contest and a flashback to those in the 90s. And then we have this anticipatory, maybe nervous emoticon, which hints at his kind of own vulnerability for trusting, but also a warning to others that their moral compass is about to come under the spotlight. So he's assigning himself an authoritative role in the group without any justification, which is quite a parental kind of register. Do as I say, because I told you, a kind of personal authority. Now, what happens next is very important. If the next person to comment disaligns from Green 1M, either by ignoring his comment or disagreeing, it compromises his authority. But even though Green 2M contributed 0 to the group and is therefore a target of the threat, he saves face. He says, hey guys, that's a decent group score. Let's use it as motivation to get a bigger pot. So he's echoing Green 1M's use of the word score and uses the word let's to kind of signal in-group membership. Green 1M isn't having any of it at all, but because he's disaligning by evaluating the stance focus, which is the group result, negatively, not positively. And he says, ouch, £69 out of a possible £120. Come on, people, add all the credits to the group pot and we'll get 1.5 times the amount for individuals. If we all do the same, we will all end up better off. So he's escalated the threat and equates their lack of cooperation with personal injury. Ouch. And notice the full stop. These are optional in computer-mediated communication, and studies show that this signals bluntness or annoyance worlds away from his kind of playful exclamation marks. And then he's got that subsequent game show-esque £69 out of a possible 120, which really shames the extent of their cooperative behaviour. And it also conveys that anything less than full cooperation is not altruistic. So he's really establishing group norms here, and his disappointment is a form of like social shunning to persuade people who are tempted by the short-term benefits of free riding to think of the greater good and the long-term reputational consequences. And we see more of his parental tone here with the imperative, add all the credits, encouraging good behaviour and no hedging. And he also repositions himself as the authority, undermining Green 2M's attempt to share his equal status. Green 3F then joins and says, hi all, that's an interesting figure. Task was surprisingly quick and easy. Not sure what I was expecting though. So she's somewhat disaligning. She's kind of ignoring what Green 1M's saying. But Green 2M then says in comment 7, I agree with Green 1M. We should all think of the group in order to get a bigger amount. Now it's conditional if because after that then we have Green 4F who says I'm happy to add all credits to the group if everyone is in agreement. So the alignment there is tempered a bit because it's conditional. Yeah, I'll do it if everyone else agrees. So it's still alignment, but it's slightly tempered. Now, as support for his stance begins to be voiced, Green 1M kind of abandons his really stern tone from before, and he adopts this kind of reverse, kind of childlike game show-esque yay, followed by a collectivist call to arms where he says all for one and one for all, with the return of excitability. Now, the final factor is Green 5F's closing confirmation. Now, we saw with the orange group, the politician, that the ending was not good, at least if we all contribute something. This is different. She says, hi everyone, hope you're all well. Really glad to hear everyone getting on board with putting all their squeezes into the group pot. She's implicating everyone. This looks like a really interesting study. I put in all of my 40 in the group pot in the first round and we'll do the same in the second round. I hope we can make it to 120 in the second round. Come on, everyone, let's band together and get the best possible outcome. So she's mirroring Green 1M's kind of animated game show effect with the smiley emoji, the exclamation marks, his phrase, come on, the game term round, which didn't feature very much at all in the rest of the data set, and the communal phrase band together. So despite this rocky beginning, the discussion ends with a really high degree of alignment and full cooperation in round 2. In social dilemmas, this is an example of how an agent can make a chosen norm salient to induce cooperative behaviour. And Green 1M set this group identity norm through registers associated with cooperation. Now, I'm happy to leave this for the Q&A. So if you'd like, I will go straight to the conclusion and then I can show you what other groups did. But this is basically to say that we saw similar patterns, such as game show terms like team mauve and trust issues and so on. So I'll leave this now, but happy to come back to it. Hopefully this kind of case study approach is relevant to your interest in the linguistic markers of honesty, albeit not a political context per se, but cooperative one, and how these markers were perceived as honest or dishonest. I would like to say we can't rule out the role of individual differences. There's been a lot of work, for example, in explaining behaviour with the Hexaco personality framework, in particular the honesty-humility dimension, which is greed, avoidance, sincerity, fairness and modesty. And it deals with active cooperation, where people are cooperative despite the temptation to exploit. And researchers actually found that fairness and greed avoidance are strongly related to pro-social behaviour. But what's not been explored is kind of a discourse analysis with the behavioural experiment that accounts for the individual differences. I know I kind of sped up there at the end, but happy to kind of go back to that other slide, and hopefully I can answer your questions. But yes, thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Very interesting. We'll be opening this for a discussion now. So please raise your hand, or we'll just jump into the convo. Yeah, Gordon.
Sorry, just trying to find the unmute. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm slightly struck by, in the examples you showed anyway, how infrequently in the final rounds of chat, individuals are identified and singled out. Right, so there may be some that I didn't see, but when people are disappointed, which they clearly are, right? They tend to say, oh, you know, that's very disappointing that not everybody contributed, and things like that. As we know, and as you know, I'm sure, one of the most successful ways to increase cooperation in public goods games is to allow punishment of people who haven't contributed. So I was sort of expecting to see something a bit more like the punishment of individuals. So, you know, I'm disappointed in 5F because you said you would contribute 40, but in fact contributed nothing. So I just wondered if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, that's a good yes, and is that punishment in both chats? Because I wonder if there's, for example, I was surprised, this is me trying to go back into in the politician, where she comments orange, I think it's orange 3F. So yeah, so orange 3F, she says, yeah, thank you for donating 40 also. I feel that's a good result. Part of me wonders if there's a saving face element, because if I punish you, it shows that it's got to me, I don't know, that it's impacted me in some way, and that I've essentially been mugged off. And I wonder if there's an element of saying, well done, everyone, to kind of save face. That's one. And also, I feel like there was punishment from in the business meeting. I mean, he did single out people. You know, gold 1F is moving mad, gold 5F is moving loose. I think that's when people were making explicit promises. I think when the promises were vague and someone said, oh yeah, okay, I'll contribute more, I'll contribute at least something, the person maybe didn't feel that they could punish us as much as when someone said, I will do it. This was actually one of the only examples with Gold 5M, who said, I will explicitly contribute all 40. And then other people were more strategically ambiguous. They were very vague. They were like, oh yeah, I'll give more. But I do wonder if it's a reputational thing to not call people out, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting. I was wondering if you could go back maybe to the second to last slide.
Yes.
Yes, that one.
Yes.
Yeah, and really what I was curious about is whether you had some more quantitative summaries of what's going on, because I think you had, how many groups did you run? It was quite a few.
Yeah, we had 18 groups.
Right. And so if you kind of tried to summarize all 18 along kind of like these criteria, what do you find? I mean, I find the individual transcripts fascinating. Really interesting. You can just imagine these kids or whatever sitting there doing this. But do you have some more aggregate summaries?
Yes, so yeah, good question. So we wanted to combine the quantitative with the qualitative. In terms of the quantitative for all groups, I will go back to the consensus score. So this is, and again, it seems very closely related to alignment, but it is different. But
Right.
This was where we coded every group, every comment, in terms of how much that comment kind of contributed to a group consensus to cooperate. So as I said, doubts, hesitations would go nearer the -1,
Yeah.
and promises and encouragements would go nearer the top. But these were sentences examined in isolation. The alignment graph we only did for those 3 transcripts, but it could be repeated for.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was wondering, right, because there could be a parallel sort of aggregate alignment analysis you could do with this, and also following up on Gordon, you could quantify the effect of punishment maybe at the first round, and how do you have enough data for that? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, to quantify the punishment elements.
The presence and then the effect. So in other words, could it be the case that the groups with punishment then did better?
Yes. Yes, so that wasn't, well, I guess it was quantified in one element with the let me think, with the consensus score, because it would be, for example, if someone said like questions, are we going to contribute more? And it had quite that kind of stern tone. I might just go to an example, if I may. In other groups, so disalignment in the form of punishment on the left-hand side. This was patterns that we found throughout other groups. With the consensus score, punishments would have actually got quite a high score, but we didn't isolate that. It was just it just came into the consensus score. But overall, in terms of how many punishments there weren't as many as I thought there would be. There was this woman, she actually, so she said, morning all, she put most into in her group in the first round. We do not have that much in the group pot. If everyone puts in the group pot, earnings will be more. What's everyone's take on this? And she came into the lab and she said, I'm really miffed. And she was, quite upset with it, but there weren't as many punishments as I thought there would be. Again, I wonder whether that's to do with saving face or something else, or maybe people felt that they didn't, especially in the first round, but there weren't many punishments in the second round either, which is interesting. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Yeah, more questions. Yeah, okay, so Fabio and Alessandro, and I think that this is, I also, I apologize, but I need to stay. So Fabio will continue to moderate the discussion from now. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you again, Zoe.
No worries. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you very much, Zoe, for the talk. I have two questions. One is a curiosity. If you had like a control group where there was no discussion at all, and so people just saw the numbers, and then what happened then?
So
or something similar.
Yes, so our baseline, there was still the discussion, but there was no I didn't reveal people's individual contributions, but so that we didn't have a control of no communication.
Okay.
Which is what most studies actually have, is when they look at communication, they typically have no communication, condition, communication, and it's very kind of binary in that sense. Or that's how they typically operationalize it, and they do see that the communication the communication condition, the cooperation is higher. And then they've looked at different mediums actually, so face-to-face, computer mediated, like text-to-speech, and face-to-face typically does the best. But in our group, our baseline was just, you've got £86 in the group pot. So there was always a chat, there was always a communication element.
Okay. And so my second question is a bit more generic, because I think that whenever like people talk together, so the number of shared squeeze increase, generally speaking, I think.
Yes.
And the groups themselves were organized in a sort of heterogeneous way. So they were in group according to some rationale, I think. Right.
Yeah.
They were like random.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Random. Yeah.
So I was thinking like what's your take on translating this kind of, behavior about social dilemmas in real life situation where social dilemma can be discussed, like, I don't know, parliaments or social media where people are actually aggregated together because of shared behavior or shared values or shared parties or whatever it is. And then they find themselves clashing with other groups that have different takes. So.
Yes. And in terms of, how to analyze that, or how
to analyze, and how can we, if we can translate this mechanic into real life?
Yeah, I think I would really like to have done the alignment graphs for all 3 dimensions of because I think and it was the US the disagreements in the US political. I think it was a poster that I saw on the Honesty Project like website, where it was the coding of retweets and replies, and I thought it was really interesting. But ideally, I think it would be good to code for the affect, the emotion, as well as the alignment and the investment. And I think that would just add even more nuance to it, because I think when you can kind of see how things are aligning, there might be a way to be able to kind of predict. And again, especially with the registers, essentially the registers that had very high social distance, so business, political versus kind of game show family. If I'd be interested to see if in social media, people who are clashing, what kind of registers they'd be using, and if there are certain words that almost like corpus linguistics, I guess, in that sense, especially for lots of data on social media, and then coding in terms of those 3 dimensions of stance, because I'd be very interested in how the effect and the alignment kind of come together. And that's Kiesling's, because he coded Reddit posts, and so it's in a social media environment, which might be quite relevant. It's interactional stance taking an interactional forum, and it's Scott Kiesling. That's kind of a real life, I sense, because he's coding existing data on social media. Well, Reddit. Yeah.
I wrote that sources down, so I'm going to have a look about that.
Yes. Yeah. It's quite a good way of turning something like stance, which I think can be very qualitative, and turning it from a computational perspective, which is really interesting. Or at least, for me. Anyway, thank you for your questions.
Do we have any other questions?
Can I follow up on what you just said, Zoe, extrapolating from that? The distinction between register and alignment is fascinating. And I think the point you just made is that a register is something that you could pick up computationally more easily than a stance, right? Because a register to me is sort of, it's sort of a style, it's the choice of words, it is the kind of thing, it's like a sentence, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, that's a really, really good question. And I think you would be able to pick up on registers. For example, business speak, things like words like solution, profitable, but then it gets a bit more nuanced. For example, the work on political registers, Anita Fetzer, she says, I believe, for example, has a stronger epistemic stance than I think. And that's because I believe, I think she argues, it's not gone through the process of grammaticalization. So it's far more, it stands out more. I think is a bit more of a discourse marker. We say that just kind of, we say it to fill sentences. And that's a bit harder. I mean, you might be able to do some coding for it, but sometimes it requires that kind of human eye to go through points. For some registers, definitely you'd be able to do that. And I think that's to combine the two would be really cool. The alignment and the register. I mean, ideally, I would just get loads of data and do all of
that. Right. So the political registers, you just mentioned a name there, I think.
Yes.
I'm interested in that.
Yes. So let me go to, I can go to the, it's Fetzer. Here we go. So Anita Fetzer, and she says, and the name of the paper is I Think, I Mean, I Believe in Political Discourse. So she's a linguist and she analyzes political speeches.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, hopefully might be useful.
Okay. Well, that does seem to relate a lot to what Fabio and Alessandro and Almo and I are doing at the moment, and Christoph. So yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's so interesting. When I was on your website, I was like, I want to talk about all of these projects, or I want to know more, or I want to know about them. But
well, you just got to subscribe to our mailing list or go to our YouTube channel, and then you can participate.
Yeah. Did not know there was a YouTube channel. So yeah, I mean, less enthused that my face will be on there, but I'll definitely sign up to that. So thank you.
Okay.
Some
Cool.
really good stuff along with the misinformation. Yeah,
Cool.
thank you.
Thank you.
I believe we still have some minutes for some other questions, like 3 or 4 minutes.
I might get away from the less interesting references slide.
No, I just linked to what Steve said. Oh, Steve, you had a question probably.
Well,
Sorry.
just Zoe, because you went to that slide again, the last thing is kind of a teaser. The humility thing. I published a paper early this year or last year, I can't remember, with Deborah Newman on the role of humility and belief in misinformation. And so I'm kind of interested in what you thought you had in mind here. I mean, this is just a pointer to precedents. It's not that you looked at humility yet, right?
Correct. Yes, I was like future studies. It would be really interesting to combine these. But that sounds really interesting. Humility and misinformation. And is it that the people who score highly on humility are more likely to believe misinformation?
No, the other way around. People who are high in humility are better discerners between nonsense and true information. People who are low on humility, I mean, people who think they
Oh,
know,
yes. Yes.
right?
Yes.
They
Sorry.
don't believe anything. That's basically what we find, right?
Yes.
And we're not the first people to find that. I mean, there's work by Motta et al. Suggesting that the people who think they know more about vaccinations than doctors actually know the least. So, which is not surprising. I mean, of course, anybody who says I know more than a doctor about vaccination probably doesn't have a clue about anything.
Yes.
And
yes.
so, yeah, that seems to be, that's out there. That relation.
And that was a paper what was the name of your paper? Sorry, that.
It's called, I have to look it up myself. The co-authors were Deborah Newman and Ruti Mayo from Hebrew University. And here we are, believing in nothing and believing in everything. I'll put the
Brilliant.
I'll put the DOI in the chat.
Oh, thanks.
There we go.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
And we've done some follow-ups, Deborah. That's Deborah's PhD. And so, yeah, there's probably more forthcoming.
Awesome. That's I think the individual differences when it intersects with these elements is fascinating. Thank you for letting me know.
The role of humility is fascinating, in the sense that humility means you acknowledge the possibility you might be wrong. But it appears that the moment you do that, you're actually much better at believing the right things.
Yes.
That seems to be the emerging conclusion.
Gosh, brilliant. Okay, well, I've made a note of that DOI. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can end it here. It's almost like 2 p.m. So thank you very much, Zoe, for your talk. And thank you everyone for attending. I don't think we have a TeDCog meeting next week. Or at least I don't have one in my calendar, but there is one so in 2 weeks from now.
Correct. I'm not available next week. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much again. I'll stop the recording and have a nice weekend.